Prostitute abandoned on the street, she was sheltered by an Apache with scars like hers, cast away like human refuse. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Bitter Creek, a forgotten town where hope went to die. Sarah Miller lay crumpled in the dirt outside the saloon, her once white dress now stained with mud, blood, and the cruel indifference of men who saw her as nothing more than damaged goods. "Get up, you worthless wretch!" Jake Morrison's voice cut through the desert air like a whip. The saloon owner kicked dirt at her prone form, his face twisted with disgust. "You're bad for business. Nobody wants to look at those ugly scars while they're drinking." Sarah's fingers instinctively moved to her face, tracing the raised welts that crisscrossed her left cheek, souvenirs from a client who decided she needed to be taught a lesson about talking back. The other girls had watched in silence as Jake dragged her from the saloon, none daring to speak up. They knew their own positions were just as precarious. "Please, Jake," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I got nowhere else to go. This is all I know. Should have thought about that before you started scaring away customers." Jake spat, tossing her meager belongings into the dust. "Find yourself another town, another life. Just get out of my sight." The townspeople gathered like vultures, their whispers sharp as broken glass. Mrs. Henderson clutched her shawl tighter, pulling her children away as if Sarah's misfortune might be contagious. Sheriff Davis watched from his office window, but made no move to intervene. Fallen women weren't his concern unless they caused trouble for decent folks. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson, Sarah pulled herself to her feet. Her body ached from the beating she'd taken, and her spirit felt even more battered. She gathered her few possessions, a worn Bible her mother had given her, a faded photograph of better times, and the tattered dress on her back. With nowhere to go and no one to turn to, Sarah began walking toward the outskirts of town, her bare feet leaving small clouds of dust in her wake. Behind her, the sounds of Bitter Creek faded into the distance, the tinkling of piano keys, the rough laughter of men, the clinking of glasses filled with whiskey and broken dreams. The desert stretched endlessly before her, a vast expanse of red earth and stubborn scrub brush. As darkness crept across the land, Sarah's legs finally gave out near a cluster of weathered rocks. She collapsed, her body racked with sobs that echoed off the canyon walls. She was alone, truly alone, with nothing but the stars as witnesses to her despair. The cicadas began their evening song, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, a sound that seemed to mirror the ache in her heart, the warrior's silent vigil. 3 miles from where Sarah lay broken, Joseph Crowfeather sat motionless on a ridge overlooking the valley. His weathered hands rested on his knees as he watched the lights of Bitter Creek flicker in the distance like dying embers. The Apache warrior had been observing the town for weeks, studying the patterns of its inhabitants with the patience his grandfather had taught him. Joseph's own face bore the permanent reminders of his encounters with the white man's world. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a gift from a cavalry saber during the Indian Wars. His arms were marked with burns from the time soldiers had tried to civilize him at a government school, pressing hot irons against his skin when he refused to speak English. The wind carried voices across the desert, and Joseph's keen ears picked up the sounds of commotion from the town. He'd seen this before, the casting out of the unwanted, the discarded. It was a ritual as old as humanity itself, and one that transcended the boundaries between Apache and white society. As the night deepened, Joseph began his patrol of the surrounding area. It was a habit born of necessity. In this harsh land, survival often depended on knowing who moved through your territory. His moccasined feet made no sound on the rocky ground as he navigated the familiar paths, carved by centuries of his people's passage. The moon hung full and bright overhead when Joseph first spotted the figure huddled against the rocks. From a distance, he could make out the shape of a woman, her body curled in on itself like a wounded animal seeking shelter. He approached cautiously, his hand resting on the knife at his belt, not from any sense of threat, but from the instinct of a man who had learned to be wary of the unexpected. As he drew closer, Joseph could see the woman's condition more clearly. Her dress was torn and dirty, her hair matted with dust and what looked like dried blood. She was shivering in the desert cold, her arms wrapped around herself in a futile attempt to find warmth. Joseph studied her face in the moonlight and felt something stir within him, a recognition that went beyond the physical. Here was someone who had been marked by the same kind of cruelty that had shaped his own existence. The scars on her face told a story he knew all too well, written in a language of pain that needed no translation. He could have walked away. In the white man's world, approaching a woman alone in the desert could mean trouble, accusations, violence, or worse. But Joseph had lived long enough to know that sometimes the right thing to do was also the most dangerous. Settling onto his haunches a respectful distance away, Joseph waited. He would not startle her or force his presence upon her. Instead, he would sit vigil through the night, a silent guardian ensuring that whatever predators roamed these hills, whether two-legged or four, would find their path blocked by an Apache warrior who understood the weight of abandonment. The desert night stretched on, filled with the sounds of hunting owls and scurrying creatures. Joseph remained motionless, his eyes moving between the woman and the surrounding landscape, ready to protect someone who had already suffered far too much at the hands of a world that showed no mercy to the wounded. First light, first contact. Sarah awakened to the scent of wood smoke and something else, a herbal fragrance that seemed to wrap around her like a gentle embrace. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then the memories crashed back like a cold wave. Jake's cruel words, the townspeople's stares, the long walk into the desert. She sat up slowly, her body protesting every movement. The sun was just beginning to peek over the eastern hills, painting the sky in soft pastels. A few yards away, she spotted the source of the smoke. A small, controlled fire burned in a circle of stones, and beside it sat a man unlike any she'd ever seen. Joseph Crowfeather watched her with dark eyes that seemed to hold depths of understanding. His long black hair was streaked with silver, and his skin was weathered by years under the desert sun. Most striking were the scars that marked his face and arms, raised lines that spoke of battles fought and survived. Sarah's first instinct was fear. Everything she'd heard about Apaches painted them as savage killers, but this man's posture suggested anything but aggression. He sat with his legs crossed, his hands resting peacefully on his knees, making no move toward the weapons she could see at his belt. You're an Apache, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling of the fire. Joseph nodded slowly. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear. I am Joseph Crowfeather. You are hurt. It wasn't a question, and Sarah found herself touching her face self-consciously. The scars felt hot under her fingertips, a constant reminder of her worthlessness in the eyes of others. But when she looked into Joseph's eyes, she saw no disgust, no judgment, only a quiet recognition that made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. I'm Sarah, she said, then immediately regretted it. Why had she given him her real name? What if he took her back to town, claimed some reward for finding the runaway prostitute? But Joseph simply nodded again. Sarah, he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. You need water, food. He reached into a leather pouch and withdrew a water skin, holding it out to her. Sarah hesitated. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, warning her about accepting anything from strangers, especially Indians. But her throat was parched, and her lips were cracked from the desert heat. She took the water skin with trembling hands and drank deeply. The water was cool and clean, tasting of nothing but pure refreshment. When she tried to hand it back, Joseph shook his head. Keep, he said. You need more than I do. From another pouch, he produced what looked like dried meat and some kind of cake made from ground nuts and berries. Sarah's stomach growled audibly, and she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a proper meal. Why are you helping me? She asked, accepting the food but not yet eating it. People in town say your kind can't be trusted. Joseph's expression didn't change, but Sarah thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, perhaps amusement or maybe sadness. People in town say many things, he replied. They say the same about your kind. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. She was an outcast, just like him. Society had marked them both as dangerous, unworthy of compassion or basic human dignity. The realization should have been crushing, but instead, it felt oddly liberating. Where will you go? Joseph asked, his voice gentle. Sarah looked toward the horizon where the desert stretched endlessly in all directions. I don't know, she admitted. I ain't got nowhere. Joseph was quiet for a long moment, studying the fire as if it held answers to questions he hadn't yet asked. Finally, he looked up at her with those dark, knowing eyes. My camp is not far, he said. You can rest there, heal. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. When was the last time someone had offered her kindness without expecting something in return? When was the last time someone had looked at her scars and seen something other than damaged goods? I don't have anything to give you, she whispered. Joseph stood and began gathering his things, moving with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to living off the land. You have already given me something, he said without looking at her. What's that? For the first time, Joseph's stern expression softened slightly. The chance to remember that kindness still exists in this world. The healing place. Joseph's camp was hidden in a natural amphitheater formed by red sandstone cliffs, invisible from the main trails but offering a perfect view of the surrounding desert. Sarah followed him through a narrow canyon, marveling at how he seemed to know every rock and crevice. The walls rose high above them, carved by centuries of wind and rain into fantastic shapes that reminded her of cathedral spires. "How did you find this place?" she asked, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "My grandfather brought me here when I was young," Joseph replied, his moccasins making no sound on the smooth rock floor. He said it was a place of healing, where the earth's medicine was strongest. They emerged into a circular clearing surrounded by towering cliffs. A small spring bubbled up from the rocks, forming a clear pool before disappearing into the ground. Near the water, Joseph had erected a traditional Apache wickiup, a dome-shaped shelter made from bent saplings and covered with animal hides and brush. Sarah had never seen anything like it. The construction was both simple and ingenious, designed to withstand the harsh desert climate while blending seamlessly with the natural surroundings. Bundles of herbs hung from the framework, filling the air with their medicinal fragrance. "This is beautiful," Sarah breathed, and she meant it. After the squalor of the saloon and the harsh emptiness of the desert, this hidden sanctuary felt like something from a dream. Joseph gestured toward a flat rock near the spring. "Sit, rest." As Sarah settled herself by the water, Joseph busied himself with preparing what looked like a meal. He worked with efficient, practiced movements, building up the fire and setting a clay pot to heat over the flames. Into the pot went dried meat, wild onions, and various plants that Sarah couldn't identify. "What are you making?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Stew," Joseph said simply. "Good for strength, good for healing." While the food cooked, Joseph disappeared into the wickiup and returned with an armload of supplies. Sarah watched in fascination as he sorted through various bundles of herbs, selecting specific plants with the expertise of someone who had spent years learning their properties. "My grandmother was a medicine woman," Joseph explained, noticing her interest. "She taught me the old ways before the soldiers came." There was pain in his voice when he mentioned the soldiers, and Sarah found herself wanting to know more, but she held her tongue. She understood better than most that some wounds were too deep to probe, even with gentle curiosity. Instead, she asked, "What happened to your face?" Joseph looked up from his herbs, his scarred hands stilling in their work. For a moment, Sarah thought she'd overstepped, that he would shut down the way men often did when confronted with uncomfortable questions. But then he set down the plants and turned to face her fully. "Cavalry saber," he said matter-of-factly. "I was 15. Soldiers came to take us to the reservation. I tried to protect my sister." "Did you succeed?" Joseph's expression grew distant. "No, she died on the journey. Many died." Sarah felt her heart clench. She'd heard stories about the Indian Wars, of course, but they'd always been told from the perspective of brave soldiers taming savage lands. No one had ever spoken of the families torn apart, the children who died far from home. "I'm sorry," she said and meant it. Joseph nodded, then gestured to her face. "What happened to yours?" Sarah's hand flew to her scarred cheek. For a moment she considered lying, inventing some noble story about an accident or a heroic rescue. But something in Joseph's eyes, that same recognition she'd seen earlier, made her tell the truth. "A customer," she said quietly. "He said I was getting too familiar, that I needed to remember my place. He had a knife." Joseph's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "Men who hurt women are cowards. They fear what they cannot control. Is that what you think I am? Something to be controlled? I think you are a woman who has survived what would have killed a weaker person," Joseph said, returning to his preparation of the herbs. "Survival is not shameful. It is strength." The words hit Sarah like a revelation. For so long, she'd been taught that her very existence was shameful, that she was nothing more than a vessel for other people's desires and frustrations. But Joseph spoke of survival as if it were something to be proud of, a testament to inner strength rather than moral weakness. As the day wore on, Joseph continued his gentle ministrations. He prepared a poultice from the herbs and showed Sarah how to apply it to her wounds to prevent infection. He shared the stew he'd made, which tasted better than anything she'd eaten in months. Most importantly, he treated her with a quiet dignity that she'd almost forgotten existed. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah asked as the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson. Joseph looked up from where he was banking the fire for the night. "In my language, we have a saying, 'The earth provides for all her children. You are the earth's child just as I am. It is my duty to provide when I can. But I'm white. Your people and mine. Our people," Joseph interrupted gently. "Nothing more, nothing less. The earth does not see color when she decides who deserves to live." That night, Sarah slept in the wickiup while Joseph took his blankets outside under the stars. For the first time in months, she slept without fear, without the constant anxiety of wondering what violence the next day might bring. In this hidden place, under the protection of a scarred Apache warrior, she began to remember what it felt like to be safe, learning to live again. Days passed in the canyon like pages in a book Sarah had never learned to read. Each morning brought new lessons from Joseph, not just about survival, but about seeing the world through different eyes. He taught her to identify edible plants, to read the signs that warned of approaching weather, to move quietly through the desert without leaving tracks. "Why are you teaching me these things?" Sarah asked one afternoon as they gathered wild berries from a hidden grove. "I'm not planning to become an Apache." Joseph smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "You are already learning to be yourself," he said. "That is harder than becoming anyone else." Sarah had to think about that. For so long she'd been what other people wanted her to be. First her father's obedient daughter, then her husband's dutiful wife. Finally the saloon girls the men of Bitter Creek paid to use. She'd almost forgotten there was a person underneath all those roles, someone with her own thoughts and feelings and dreams. "I don't remember who I was before," she admitted, settling beside Joseph on a flat rock overlooking the canyon. "Before everything went wrong. Tell me about the last time you were happy," Joseph said, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone who understood that healing required time. Sarah closed her eyes, reaching back through years of pain and humiliation. "I was 16, she said slowly. "My mama and I were making preserves from the apples in our orchard. She was teaching me her secret recipe, the one her grandmother had taught her. We were laughing about something, I can't remember what, and I thought that was what my whole life would be like. Just simple happiness, making things with my hands, taking care of people I loved. What happened to that dream?" "Papa lost the farm," Sarah said, opening her eyes to stare at the desert landscape. "Gambling debts. He arranged for me to marry a man in town, said it would solve all our problems. But the man, he wasn't kind, and when he died I had nowhere to go. No skills except..." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Joseph was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother," he said finally. "She is still alive?" "I don't know. I haven't seen her since I married. She might not even want to see me now, knowing what I became." "A survivor," Joseph said firmly. "That is what you became. Your mother, if she loves you, will see that." That evening, as they sat by the fire sharing another of Joseph's simple but nourishing meals, Sarah found herself talking about things she'd never told anyone. She spoke of her fears, her shame, her desperate longing for a life that felt meaningful. Joseph listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that helped her understand her own thoughts more clearly. "In my tribe," Joseph said when she'd finished, "we believe that every person has a purpose, a gift they're meant to share with the world. Sometimes that gift is hidden by pain or fear, but it's always there." "What's your gift?" Sarah asked. Joseph gestured to the canyon around them, to the thriving garden he'd cultivated using traditional methods, to the shelter he'd built with his own hands. "I help things grow," he said simply. "Plants, animals, people. I help them find their strength. And what about me? What's my gift?" Joseph studied her face in the firelight, his expression thoughtful. "You have the heart of a healer," he said. "I see it in the way you tend the plants I've shown you, the way you care for wounded animals. You want to help others feel better." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "Nobody's ever said anything like that about me before." "Then they weren't looking close enough," Joseph replied. "Or maybe they were afraid of what they might see." "What do you mean?" Joseph poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the star-filled sky. "Healers are dangerous to people who profit from pain. You cannot sell whiskey to a man who is at peace with himself. You cannot control a woman who knows her own worth." The words resonated deep in Sarah's chest. She thought of Jake Morrison, of the way he'd encouraged the girls to drink and fight among themselves, keeping them weak and dependent. She thought of the men who'd paid for her services, who'd seemed to take pleasure not just in her body, but in her degradation. "How do you know all this?" she asked. "Because I have been both the wounded and the healer," Joseph said. "After my sister died, I was full of rage. I wanted to hurt everyone who had hurt me. But my grandmother taught me that anger without purpose is like a fire that burns everything, including the person who carries it. She showed me how to use my pain to help others." "Is that why you helped me?" Joseph looked at her directly, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "I helped you because you reminded me of myself when I was lost. But I continue to help you because I see who you really are beneath the scars. You are not the broken woman they threw away. You are someone who has been tested by fire and emerged stronger." That night, Sarah lay in the wickiup staring up at the smoke hole that revealed a perfect circle of stars. For the first time in years, she felt something stirring within her that wasn't fear or shame or desperate need. It was hope, fragile and tentative, but real. She was beginning to remember who she was, and more importantly, who she might become. The reckoning approaches. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's arrival in the canyon, and the change in her was remarkable. The hollow look had left her eyes, replaced by something approaching peace. Her scars remained, but they no longer seemed to define her. She moved with more confidence, spoke with more strength, and had begun to smile, really smile, for the first time in years. Joseph watched her progress with quiet satisfaction. This morning she was tending to a wounded jackrabbit they'd found caught in a trap, her hands gentle but sure as she cleaned and dressed its injured leg. The animal, which had been wild with panic when they'd first freed it, now lay calm under her ministrations. "He's getting better," Sarah said, looking up at Joseph with genuine joy. "Look, he's putting weight on it now." "You have good hands," Joseph observed. "Healing hands." Sarah flushed with pride. It had been so long since anyone had complimented her skills, her worth as a person rather than as an object of desire. "My mama always said I had a gift with hurt things." I'd forgotten, but their peaceful routine was about to be shattered. As Sarah released the rabbit and watched it hop away into the brush, Joseph's head snapped up, his warrior instincts suddenly alert. He'd heard something, the distant sound of horses picking their way through the canyon approaches. "Sarah," he said quietly, his voice carrying an undertone of warning, "go into the wickiup, now." Sarah looked at him in confusion. "What's wrong?" "Riders coming, many of them." Joseph was already moving, gathering his weapons with practiced efficiency. "They are not friendly." Sarah's blood ran cold. She'd been dreading this moment, though she'd almost convinced herself it would never come. Somehow, someway, they'd found her. Jake Morrison, the sheriff, maybe even some of her former customers. They'd tracked her down to drag her back to the life she'd tried so hard to escape. "Maybe they're just passing through," she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew it wasn't true. This place was too hidden, too far off the main trails. Anyone who found it was looking specifically for something. Joseph shook his head grimly. "They know we are here. They have been watching, waiting." The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls. Joseph quickly stamped out the fire and began covering any signs of their presence. But Sarah knew it was too late. The riders were too close and there was nowhere to run. "Joseph," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "if they take me back, they'll kill you. You have to leave now." Joseph looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before, fierce, protective, and utterly determined. "I do not run from cowards," he said. "These aren't just any men," Sarah pleaded. "They're from town. They think I'm their property and they'll think you stole me. They'll hang you just for looking at me wrong. Then we will face them together," Joseph said, checking his rifle. "I will not let them take you." The first rider appeared at the mouth of the canyon, Sheriff Davis, his badge glinting in the afternoon sun. Behind him came Jake Morrison, 3 of his saloon regulars and 2 men Sarah didn't recognize but whose hard faces marked them as troublemakers for hire. "Well, well," Jake called out, his voice carrying easily across the canyon. "Look what we got here, the missing whore and her savage boyfriend." Sarah felt her stomach drop. These men had already decided what they were going to do. This wasn't about justice or law. It was about power, about punishing 2 people who had dared to step outside the roles society had assigned them. Sheriff Davis urged his horse forward, his hand resting on his gun. "Sarah Miller," he called out, "you're coming with us. There's been complaints about your association with this Indian." "What complaints?" Sarah shouted back, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "I ain't hurt nobody. You've been living in sin with a savage," Jake snarled. "That's against God and nature. We're here to bring you back where you belong." "I don't belong to you." Sarah stepped forward, her fear transforming into rage. "I never did." One of the hired men laughed. "Listen to her, acting like she's got a choice. Indians got her thinking she's some kind of lady." Joseph stepped up beside Sarah, his rifle held ready but not yet aimed. "The woman stays here of her own will," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the canyon. "She owes you nothing." "Indian," Sheriff Davis said, his voice dripping with false authority. "You're interfering with the return of stolen property. Stand aside, or we'll add kidnapping to the charges." "I'm not property," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I'm a human being and I choose to be here." Jake Morrison spat into the dirt. "Whores don't get to choose," he said. "You got debts to pay, services to provide. You belong to me until I say otherwise." "No," Sarah said, and the word rang through the canyon like a bell. "I don't belong to anyone but myself." The hired men were spreading out now, trying to flank them. Joseph noticed their movement and subtly shifted his position, placing himself between Sarah and the greatest threat. "This is your last chance," Sheriff Davis called out. "Come along peacefully, and we'll go easy on you. Keep defying us, and we'll do what we have to do." Sarah looked at Joseph, this man who had shown her kindness when the world had shown her only cruelty. She thought of the past weeks, of the healing she'd found in this hidden place, of the woman she was becoming. Then she thought of what awaited her back in Bitter Creek, the beatings, the humiliation, the slow death of everything good inside her. "I'm not going back," she said, her voice carrying clearly to the men below. "I'd rather die first." Jake Morrison's face twisted with rage. "Then that can be arranged," he snarled, reaching for his gun. The canyon erupted in violence. "The price of freedom." The first shot shattered the desert silence like breaking glass. Jake Morrison's bullet struck the rock wall inches from Sarah's head, sending stone chips flying. Joseph responded instantly, his rifle barking as he put a bullet through Jake's shoulder, spinning the saloon owner from his saddle. "Take cover," Joseph shouted, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her behind a natural stone fortification. The canyon had become a death trap, echoing with gunfire and the screams of wounded horses. Sheriff Davis was shouting orders, trying to coordinate his men's attack while staying safely behind his own cover. The hired guns were more professional, spreading out to find better positions while maintaining a steady rate of fire that kept Joseph and Sarah pinned down. "There's too many of them," Sarah gasped, pressing herself against the rock wall as bullets whined overhead. "They're going to get us." Joseph methodically reloaded his rifle, his movements calm despite the chaos around them. "Maybe," he said, "but they will pay a price for it." A new voice echoed through the canyon, one of the hired men calling out with practiced cruelty. "We know you're in there, Indian. Send out the whore and we'll make it quick for you." "Never," Joseph replied, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man who had made his choice. Sarah looked at him, this scarred warrior who had given her back her humanity, and felt something break open inside her chest. Not despair this time, but a fierce determination that surprised her with its intensity. "I won't let them kill you because of me," she said, starting to stand. Joseph's hand shot out, pulling her back down. "You think this is about you?" he asked, his dark eyes blazing. "This is about them thinking they can take whatever they want, whenever they want it. It's about them believing some people don't deserve to live free." Another volley of gunfire forced them deeper into their shelter. One of the attackers was trying to work his way around to their flank, using the canyon's natural formations as cover. Joseph spotted the movement and sent a bullet that dropped the man with a cry of pain. "How many more?" Sarah asked, trying to count muzzle flashes. "4, maybe 5, Joseph replied, studying the canyon walls. "But they're getting closer." That's when Sarah noticed something Joseph had missed, a thin trail of smoke rising from the canyon floor. One of the attackers had set fire to the dry brush, and the flames were spreading rapidly toward their position. "Joseph," she said, her voice tight with fear. "The fire." He looked where she pointed and cursed in Apache. The wind was carrying the flames directly toward them, and soon their shelter would become their funeral pyre. "We have to move," Joseph said, shouldering his rifle. "Stay low, stay close." They broke from cover, racing across the open ground as bullets kicked up dust around their feet. Joseph led them toward a narrow cleft in the canyon wall, a passage so small Sarah wondered if they could fit through it. "Where does it go?" she panted as they squeezed into the opening. "Up," Joseph said simply, "to the rim." The climb was treacherous, made worse by the need for silence and the sound of their pursuers crashing through the brush below. Sarah's dress caught on rocks, tearing away in strips, but she kept climbing. Behind them, the fire was spreading, filling the canyon with smoke and the acrid smell of burning brush. They emerged onto the canyon rim just as the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, the attackers were trapped between the flames and the canyon walls, their horses screaming in terror. "We could end it now," Joseph said, his rifle trained on the men below. "They cannot escape the fire." Sarah looked down at the men who had come to drag her back to hell. Part of her wanted to watch them burn, to see them suffer as she had suffered. But another part, the part Joseph had helped her rediscover, rebelled against the idea of becoming the same kind of monster they were. "No," she said quietly, "that's not who we are." Joseph looked at her with something like pride. "You are right," he said. "We are better than they are." He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted down into the canyon. "There is a path out behind the spring. Follow the water." Sheriff Davis looked up at them, his face blackened with smoke and twisted with rage. "This ain't over," he screamed. "We'll be back, then we'll be ready," Joseph called back. They watched as the surviving attackers, Jake Morrison clutching his wounded shoulder, Sheriff Davis, and 2 of the hired guns, stumbled toward the escape route Joseph had shown them. The fire was already beginning to die down, having consumed the available fuel. "What now?" Sarah asked as they made their way down the backside of the canyon. "They'll bring more men, more guns." Joseph was quiet for a long moment, studying the darkening desert. "Now we leave," he said finally. "This place is burned. Time to find another." "Together?" Sarah asked, hardly daring to hope. Joseph smiled, and in that smile Sarah saw her future. Not the one that had been forced upon her, but the one she would choose for herself. "Together," he said. "The earth is wide, and there are many places where people can live free." As they walked into the desert night, Sarah felt the last of her old life falling away like shed skin. She was no longer the broken woman who had been thrown away like garbage. She was Sarah Miller, survivor, healer, and partner to a man who had shown her that love could exist without ownership, that strength could be found in gentleness, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act was simply refusing to be what the world expected you to be. Behind them, the canyon glowed with the dying embers of their old life. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the constant threat of pursuit. But for the first time in years, Sarah wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. She had found something worth fighting for, not just her own freedom, but the right of all people to live with dignity and respect. The desert stretched endlessly before them, vast and unforgiving but also full of possibility, and somewhere in that immensity, they would build a new life together. Two scarred souls who had learned that the deepest wounds could become the source of the greatest strength. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and eternal, bearing witness to their journey toward Redham.